The modes. There is so much confusion about this subject. I think one problem is trying to get them all at once, instead of getting to know each mode and the sounds, the colors that define their character. Imagine you have 7 cousins, 7 days of the week, and 7 homes. Each night of the week they get together in a different home to have dinner. Who sits at the head of the table? The host. Who's the host? The root. That's also usually the only one left at the end of the party. Just like in music, at the end of a musical piece, the root is usually the only one left, because most musical pieces will end on the root chord. Now, unless it's an open ending, but that's a different story. Now, we're going to talk about all the modes of the 7 modes of the major scale, but what I suggest is that instead of trying to play with them all at once, which of course you can browse through them, is that you pick 1 or 2, pick them one at a time, and really experiment with the chords and the notes of that mode so that you can really get a feel for how they work. With that said, let's discuss all of them a little bit. We have the Ionian, the major, that's the eldest. Then we have Dorian. Dorian thinks major system as a commodity. You're gonna see why. Phrygian has done a lot of traveling around the world and met a lost cousin called Phrygian dominant, which we covered in the rumba lesson. Then we have Lydian. Lydian is kind of like major, but it's a little more exotic. Mixolydian is always ready for battle. Then we have Aeolian, the natural minor scale. That's the quiet one. Dorian has taken over a lot of his gigs. Last and least, really, Locrian. This one is crazy. Can sit still. At his home, chairs have 3 legs, meaning that it's never stable. It's a very unstable mode, and that's why it's not used as much as the other modes. Now, I'm going to show you some examples on how to differentiate one mode from another, and hopefully you will be able to play some of these examples, but more than play them exactly the way they are written, what I would like for you to do is take these elements, these things that I'm giving you in the examples, and then play around with them. So if you look at the first line, the first system, each line is called a system, okay? So each system in the first page at least has 4 measures each. So the first 4 measures, the first system, you can see a phrase that is very similar on measures 1 and 2, and then on measures 3 and 4. Now on 1 and 2 I wrote, then on measure 3 and 4 I wrote. So what you really want to do here is focus on what's different from one mode to the other. This is between G major and G Lydian. Why didn't I go to Dorian if Dorian is the second one? Why do I go from the first one to the fourth one? Well, because modes are also major or minor. And Ionian, the first mode, is major, so I wanted to compare it to Lydian because Lydian is just like the major mode, because it has a major third like the major mode, but it has a sharp 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the note that is going to be, the note that is really important about the Lydian mode. So let's look at that example again. You have 3 chords. It's a G chord. I said 3 chords. You really have 1 chord with a note that is going up the scale. First, using the G major scale. Here's the scale. Now you can play around if you know how to play the scale, play a little more with it. Then the Lydian. I played a wrong note there. Let's look at the next example. In the next example, we're going to compare the Aeolian natural minor scale to the Dorian mode. So if you look at measures 4 and 5, you see a D minor triad going to a G minor triad. I'm keeping the D in the bass, G minor triad, inverted triad by the way, going to another D minor triad, then another G minor triad, and back to D minor. Of course you can continue if you want, if you know the triads in more positions. So we have the D minor going to the subdominant G minor, back to D minor. So what you do is you play around with this. And then in measures 7 and 8, you have the Dorian mode. Okay, so minor was and now for Dorian we have or ending on D minor 7. The only note that changed was this one. The B flat became a B natural. So if we just take the first two chords for each, you can see it very clearly. That's minor, natural minor. This is Dorian. If we look at the next example, we're going to see, for example, a typical chord progression in a major mode and the Ionian mode, or natural major scale, and we see, for example, something like very common chord progression that you heard probably many times. Now we're going to compare it to the Mixolydian mode, another mode that is major because it has a major third, but it's always ready for battle with that flat 7. Sounds very bluesy actually. So we have the major again on measures 9 and 10. And then the Mixolydian. Now in the Mixolydian, check this out. D, C, D. D major triad, C major triad, very Mixolydian sounding. So one more time, the major, Mixolydian, I ended on an inverted D, D in second inversion with the fifth on the bass, but you can also end it there. So I hope you will pick one of these and experiment a lot with it. Another thing that you want to make sure that you look at is you want to look at the guitar horizontally. So first let's take, for example, the C major scale. I have a whole lesson on horizontal scales. If you want to check it out, it's on Jump Play, where I teach you to look at the guitar in this direction instead of always looking at the scales and your notes in a vertical position. So if I take, for example, diatonic thirds in the key of C major, I get this. Now, let's look at measure number 15. And in measure number 15, we're going to go to A Dorian, which is the second mode of G major. Now we're going to take the diatonic thirds here. I ended there, but you know, if you know more of the scale, you can continue. You can also do them on the same two strings. So maybe you're already saying, well, how does this relate to finger picking? Well, my idea with this lesson is that whatever style of finger picking you're actually working on, you will apply it to these examples and you will use the technique that you're already working on to try to learn about how to use the modes for yourself. So for example, if I go back to the first example on measure number 1, if you are a finger picker that, you know, that's like the classical technique, you know, you might say, I'm going to play a little with the Lydian mode. You can take any exercises that you're doing for finger picking and just apply it to the chords that I just showed you. If you're more like a folk country finger picker, you might want to go strummer, you can go. Same thing with the next example, you know, going back to measure number 5, you know. Dorian. Or that one. You can make a minor 7, D minor 7. Then just play the F triad and G triad and F triad and a G triad. Start observing the triads too, how you have triads that are moving. In all the modes you're going to find triads that move in a certain way and that can really give you the color of that mode. Okay, now another interval that's kind of interesting, we just did the thirds, and with the thirds, of course, again, I want you to play around with it. So maybe if you're doing the Brazilian bossa thing, you take, you know, the Dorian example on measure number 15, and you practice the rhythm with those intervals. The next interval I wanted to show you on measure 17 of the supplemental content, you will see now we have a 6. Now if instead of doing the major, I want to do the Dorian, I'm going to have to change this note to a G natural, and now I'm going to have as shown on measure 19. You know, I put a bass note there so you can play around with it. So you can also take one note at a time. So you can look, for example, at measure 19 and say, instead of playing the two notes, I'm going to look at each one of the lines. So you look, for example, only to the top note and you come up with. And if you know how to play scales, you can actually replace the fingerings, the string choices that I have and the fingerings, and you can go. Then the note that's in between the low root and that high note will be. If we put them together, that's the note that makes it sound so Dorian. That's C sharp, okay? Now I did give you examples, similar examples, walking up in sixes for all the modes. You can look at them and pick the ones that you want. And then of course you get, at one point if you're looking at examples for all the modes, you're gonna get to the Locrian. And the Locrian, why is the Locrian so weird? The Locrian is so weird because, as I said before, it's never resting. Because the root chord of the Locrian mode, for example, if we start, counting in C, that will be a B, and the chord will be first. It's a B diminished triad. As you can hear probably already, this chord cannot be a 1. This chord sounds like it wants to go somewhere, like it wants to resolve. So if you're trying to write something in the Locrian mode, you will end up. Always, most of the times you're going to end up feeling like, but that chord should be the end. Well, then you're not in Locrian, really. You can call it Locrian all you want. Like I hear some people that call it Locrian because they play, the C major scale starting on a B note over that chord. And that's okay. Some players like to look at the scale from the root of each chord, but that doesn't really mean that the music that you're playing is in the Locrian mode at all. So I cordially invite you to try to come up with a melody that is conclusive, that comes to an end. Like if I'm in major, I can say, and that's a conclusion. You can really feel that there was an ending. Now you take the Locrian mode, that tritone there doesn't let you rest. So experiment with it and see what you can come up with. Now, let's explore a little bit more the Dorian, and let's work with some triads here. Before we just did the Dorian going up in thirds like that. Now let's take this triad like a C major triad. When you have a C major triad and then you have an A on the bass, that of course is called A minor 7. We have a D major triad. In the example it says /A. I'm looking at measure number 35 and the example says /A because I kind of like to pedal that bass note there. So we have you can play this one here too. The fingerings are for you to just have a guide, but you should always try to find things in different places. So if I'm telling you to play, you also have, okay? If you look at measure number 37, now I wanted to show you how to work with a little melody. So now we have a melody on top of the chord. So we're gonna play the scale. We're gonna go from the root of the scale all the way to this third. So we're gonna go a little more than 1 octave up. But we're going to fill in with chords. So we have A5, A minor, that's the 6th, that's the note that makes it sound Dorian. And then you can play around with this a lot. You can play like this. Again, if you know how to walk, your major scale, once you identified what the relative major scale is to your mode, you can probably find different fingerings. So if you already learned, for example, your G major scale here, that's going to be the same as the A Dorian, except that now you're here. This is your root, not this one anymore. So again, the way the example is written is like this. But I don't mean for you to play it like that. I mean for you to take each of these little bits, maybe take the first 3 notes, one more note, and just milk it. So you go, the first few notes, and you just play those a lot, and you go back and forth. Oh, I'm gonna add one more, I'm gonna go a little further, and then come back all the way to the root. And then that way, you will really start getting it not only in your fingers, but also in your ears. In the next example, on measure number 39, we're going to look at something in the Lydian mode. So for example, what I wrote is, so that's a very Lydian sounding melody, because it's like at the beginning you think it's gonna go, that will be major, but it's not pure major. It's a major mode, but it's called Lydian. It's more exotic. That example is in 6/8 because I'm Argentinian and we love 6, We love those rhythms, so we like to play with a actually change the rhythm. You can take the same idea, play it in 4/4. And of course you can do all your variations with your techniques that you are practicing. In the next example, we're going to look at D mixolydian, and then something really interesting is going to happen between the Lydian and the mixolydian. What I did is I wrote a melody that is very similar. First, in C Lydian I wrote, or now for the mixolydian I wrote, or so the chords here are D5 or D major, then I wrote A minor slash D, but that can also be a C. So if the chords in C Lydian are C and D, C and D, C and D are like very characteristical of C Lydian, and the chords for mixolydian would be like D, C, D, C, D, C. If I have a chord progression that is going from a C chord to a D chord, or from a D chord to a C chord, how do I know if I'm in C Lydian or D mixolydian? Context. You have to look at the context. You have to listen to the melody. You have to try to get a feel and ask yourself, if I was playing these two chords with whatever song, with whatever melodies I'm playing, which of these two chords would be the one that will give me a definite ending? And you're gonna find that if you have, for example, that will be C Lydian. But if I'm going, you see how just by playing it a little bit different, you can make one of the chords be the one whose home you're in, whose mode you're in. And that's something that can be very confusing sometimes for people, again, because people study all the modes at once, and then when they encounter an example like that, like, I have C to D, some people say, I'm going to play C Lydian to D Mixolydian. Now again, there are some amazing players that always look at the scale that they are playing from the root of the chord. I like to think that if I have more chords that can relate to one mode, one tonality, I will relate just one scale name or mode name to all of the chords that I can, until I have to change if there is a chord that doesn't belong to that particular key. In the next example, and I wanted to give you another example of how to work with any of the modes. This other example is Dorian, and you might be saying by now, why is he using so much Dorian, Mixolydian, and Lydian? Well, that's because they are the modes that are used the most in classic rock, in pop music, in Latin music. We also have the Phrygian, and we will talk about that one soon. But here's this example in Dorian. Now we're looking at measure number 47. I'm going to play it really slow. So you have a lot that you can play with. Remember, this is a chord. That's a G major chord. You can use it as a G major chord. So using open strings as a fingerstylist is something that's super important for you to really take advantage of all the amazing things you can do with the guitar when you discover all the different positions that you can use, and then you add the positions up the neck, but then you add also the open positions. I find people, there are some people that know how to play their scales all the way up the neck, but then they can play an A natural minor scale in the open position, and missing out on the open strings, I think that's a big no-no for a guitar player. So this example again, I wrote it like, but again, what I want you to do is not just play it like that. You can play it in many different ways. You can take the same notes and go, with it. Now, the Mixolydian mode. The Mixolydian mode is very close to the blues. It's very much related to the blues. It's used in classic rock a lot. If I had to pick what is the mode that is used in classic rock, what is the scale that is used in classic rock more than any other scale on guitar solos? Definitely the pentatonic scale. What's the next one? It's the Mixolydian mode. The Mixolydian mode really relates really well to anything that is bluesy, anything that has that flat 7 sound. So if you look at the example on measure number 55, we're looking at just some notes in A Mixolydian, and then we have that's a very simple example in A Mixolydian. I could have gone and played my G notes, my power chord, my G5 with an A on the bass. See, again, open strings can have really interesting sounds sometimes, and you shouldn't miss out on those. remember, fingerings are always optional. Now, in the next example, I show you a typical bluesy, phrase. I actually wrote it with an open string. Let me play that again. You could also go and then there. Typical phrase that a lot of people know how to play. Now, if we take the same idea, we can walk down the Mixolydian scale and see how we are adding some notes to it, like. So basically, what I want to do with these two, what I want to show you is how you can go from to So mixing blues and Mixolydian is a really, really powerful thing for those of you that like improvising, taking guitar solos, or composing, music that sounds kind of bluesy like that. We take, for example, the D Mixolydian scale on measure number 63. Sorry, the numbers on the supplemental content are so small. This is a scale that a lot of people know. Now you can take an idea like that and you can use some of the open strings. So sometimes you have choices in certain keys to take open strings and add them and also use them to have a position shift. So you can go, for example, sorry. One more time. That can be also a very effective way to use your open strings. We're going to get to questions very soon, but I want to show you a couple more examples. Minor pentatonic. That's the first scale that many people learn when they first pick up the guitar. Now you take the Dorian scale. Of course, the scale also has this note, but I just played a phrase. The reason I'm comparing the Mixolydian and the Dorian to the blues is because I think a lot of people that are based in the blues, a lot of people that learn how to play blues and pentatonic scales first, always think from that perspective and then add the other notes from the other scales, thinking that the pentatonic is the center and then they can add the notes of the modes to that. A lot of people play like that. Like I can think of, I'll let you know if I can think of one, Santana, for example, who uses blues and Dorian all the time. When you hear something like, that's definitely something that goes, from blues to Dorian. Same thing, blues to Mixolydian, depending on whether it's major and minor. And then, I give you the same example with the open strings. You can take a look at some of those scales that I wrote and have some fun with it. Try to look for different ways of playing it. In example, measure number 70, I'm trying to do the same thing with open strings. example, because I'm going to teach you a really fun lick that's for G mixolydian. So G mixolydian will be right here. It's like if you know the C major scale here. Now if you start here in G, it's G mixolydian. Let's play it from high to low, so it will be. Again. Now I can use open strings obviously here too. Now check out this lick. Again. This one is based on that scale. It's got that cascading effect. Again, you can take little bits and pieces of these, like Now, what if I wanted to take that same lick and make it sound more Spanish, more flamenco-like, just a little flavor? Then I will change this note to that note. And that means I am now in the E Phrygian dominant, also known as flamenco scale mode. So instead of going playing that G, I'm gonna go, and now I have the same lick in a totally different sound. Oh yeah, the other scales have modes too, okay? So, one more time, take all the modes, take some of these examples, don't look at it as something that you have to read the whole thing or play the whole thing, just look at it kind of like a menu at a restaurant, you know? I think I'm gonna order this one today, maybe I'm gonna order the Phrygian today. Now the Phrygian mode, it's a mode that is actually kind of Spanishy. But the thing is, there's also a lot of confusion with the Phrygian mode, because the Phrygian mode is very much related, as I told you before, in his travelings he found his favorite cousin, the Phrygian dominant, which is actually a mode, as I said, of the harmonic minor scale. And what happens is that when you listen to music like you notice I played a G natural here, a G sharp here, so it's really a lot of times combined with the Phrygian dominant mode. If I have a pure E Phrygian is going to go to F, for example, and establish this E minor as the one. But then in Phrygian dominant, which is more common in flamenco and a lot of Latin music, you're gonna have all right, one more thing, and then we'll do questions if you have any. Let me give you a couple of chord progressions that are very common and very typical for each mode. Ionian major, in the key of C, 2, 5-1, D minor, G major, C, or D minor, G7, C. Dorian. D minor or D minor 7 to G7 sounds very Dorian. Phrygian. E minor to D minor, going back to E minor, very Phrygian sound. Lydian. I know you recognize this. F major to G major. Mixolydian. G major to F major. Aeolian, the natural minor, the quiet one. 1, 4, 5, 1. And some people may say, yeah, but a lot of songs in the key of A minor are here, they have an E major. Yeah, because it's using the harmonic minor scale. That's the one that's related to the other cousin, you know, the Phrygian dominant. But if you have a pure natural minor scale, then you have no dominant chord. Your 5 chord is going to be just an E minor, if you're in A, of course. The last one is the Locrian. You can go anywhere you want, but when you come back here, it's not gonna sound like home. I mean, anywhere you want in the tonality, I'm saying, like. See? You try to end on Locrian, and the chord is begging you to go somewhere else. All right, any questions today? All right, we do have some questions here. I get them through my phone. So let's see. Cindy says, have you ever used any kind of mnemonic device to help memorize the modes? I guess I have not, because I don't have the slightest idea what that is. So please send me a message and tell me what that is so you can educate me on it, because mnemonic, I actually never even heard that word. I'm sorry about that, Cindy, but the answer would be no. You don't need to memorize the modes. You need to memorize the major scale, by the way, and understand that the modes, how they relate to that scale, and then how they independently have like a life of their own and the capability of help you. Well, they don't have any capabilities. You have the opportunity to use them as a creative tool to create melodies, or once you recognize them, to use them to recognize the melodies of songs that you are already playing. Jim, hello Jim. Jim says, do all the modes apply to any scale or chord? Modes don't apply to a scale. Scales have modes. It's very simple. If I have these 5 fingers, you know, now this is the first mode. Now if I start here and put this one over there, now this is the second mode. So scales don't, modes don't apply to scales. Modes live within the scale, I could say, in a way. Although that's not necessarily very poetic, okay? Christopher says, does the tonic of a piece ever dictate which mode you should use? Well, definitely not, because when you say dictate and you say you should use, you're talking about composing or improvising, meaning that you're creating something. And if you're creating a piece of music, no rule should ever dictate what you should or should not use. You should use whatever sounds good to your ears. The tonic of a piece can tell you maybe what mode you're in, but not necessarily, because if I only give you a C major, for example, just by knowing this is going to be the tonic, you still don't know if it's going to be C major, if it's going to be C Lydian, or if it's going to be C mixolydian. So, unless, of course, that tonic chord contains one note that tells you that you are in that mode. Like, if this is my tonic, it's C major 7 sharp 11, and I make that chord the tonic, then yes, it would be obvious that I'm in Lydian because it's C major with an F sharp, as long as that chord is the tonic, of course. Big Jim says, besides mixolydian, are there other modes that work well with blues music? Well, mixolydian is going to work wonderful with blues, but besides that, sometimes you will use the major mode, the minor mode. In minor blues, you will hear the Dorian mode a lot, sometimes being used, where you have something bluesy, not exactly like a 12-bar blues with dominant chords, but for example, when you have something like so in that case you have, but you also have that note. So the Dorian works very well for minor blues. And sometimes you might see a little bit of harmonic minor in blues, but I don't think the players that are using them are, of course, thinking of harmonic minor. They just happen to might be can use it on the 5 chord, maybe a little bit of Phrygian dominant there at the end of the phrase, but mostly in blues you're going to have blues scale and mixolydian. Sometimes the natural major. It depends on what the chords are. Now, when you say blues, you're talking about a 1-4-5 with dominant chords, then mixolydian is your safest bet, and you can try a little bit of Phrygian dominant, but that's always going to give it a little bit of a Spanishy sound, as people like to call it. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Let me see. So going back to Cindy's first question, I'm so puzzled by what mnemonic means, and I will look it up when we're done with this for sure. But meanwhile, I can tell you that what I was referring to before when I said you don't really need to memorize the modes, what I was thinking of is that if you know the major scale, then all you need to do is you need to start on the 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 start on the